Good morning, everybody. Good to see all of you.
Good morning, Daishin. Morning.
Hi. I'd like to share a Zen phrase that I studied, must be about 15, at least 15 years ago now, when I was with my teacher. She shared with me a book that was all in Japanese. I couldn't understand very much of it, but I knew enough to learn how to piece together some of the kanji, and with my teacher's assistance, I was able to feebly do a feeble translation of this particular phrase that was in the book. And what's significant about this phrase book, it was published for a Japanese audience. And what's significant about it, at least as far as I'm concerned, is that my teacher's teacher, Noda Daito Roshi, whom I talked about last month when I was there, he wrote the foreword to it, or the introduction to it, or something like that. He had some part in the book itself. And so I wanted to know, like, what are some of the things that he promotes, or maybe he had some collaboration in the writing of it. But I'm not certain. It's been a while, so I don't remember exactly what his role was there, but it was some piece of this book on Zen phrases. And there's like some 80 of them. So this is just one of those phrases. And in fact, actually, I spoke about a phrase in a previous talk, maybe about a month ago. And they're fairly short, just four Chinese characters. In Japanese, the Japanese version of it reads, Ko in ya no gotoshi. And if we break down these four Chinese characters, they mean the first ko means light, light. In means negative or obscured. Goto has to do with suchness, and shi is an arrow. So one possible translation of this phrase, a ray of light obscures suchness. A ray of light obscures suchness. I want to point out that many spiritual or religious paths explicitly hold up light as somehow better than darkness. But as you can see with this phrase, it's getting at something else. But generally in our culture, we have a bias towards light. The Buddha, for example, was enlightened, right? He wasn't endarkened. But we have a bias physically, mentally, and spiritually. So physically, who wants to go into a dark room? Who wants to go into a dark room? As soon as we enter a dark room, we don't usually do things in the dark room. We turn on the light, right? We flip a switch. We want that electricity, we want the light. Interestingly, though, at Nebraska Zen Center, we have chosen, thanks to Nonin and the tradition that he passed on to us, to not have the altar lit for the first sitting of the day. So we are sitting in darkness when we sit at Nebraska Zen Center in the early hours of the morning. So it's just something to think about. Physically, we generally, it's just we don't think about it, but we want to go into light spaces, not dark spaces. With regarding mentally or maybe intellectually, who feels that they are better off remaining, quote unquote, in the dark about things? Right? We want to know. We want information. Right? We want knowledge. And then spiritually, certainly also, we find lots of symbolism around light and this is not to critique. This is not to critique our spiritual heritage. It's not to critique our flipping switches on and off. It's just to show that there's another way to think about light versus darkness, right? But certainly in our spiritual heritage, if we look at the book of Genesis, the first phrase was, "In the beginning there was light," right? So like the first line in the Bible reads that way. In the beginning there was light. And hey, who doesn't feel better when they are splashed with light when they're in a place of confusion, right? Bad things generally happen in the dark, especially when we're not paying attention, right? Or we at least, whether bad things happen or not, I guess what I'm saying is that we have the perception that bad things could happen when there's not enough light. Our fears are often tied to darkness. But Zen offers a kind of training that I think, in my experience, has been to help befriend our relationship with darkness. In the Zen poem Sando Kai, it reads, "Light and dark oppose one another like the front and back foot in walking." Light and dark oppose one another like the front and back foot in walking. Light, you can't have light without darkness, right? From a spiritual perspective, but from any perspective, light only exists because of darkness. What would light be if there wasn't darkness? And thus, the front step and the back step in walking are just like light and dark. And my own teacher, she would tell me to learn how to not be dependent on light when I was doing certain priestly functions, like putting on my robe. She would say, "Don't look in a mirror. You should be able to do it in the darkness and come out fine." And so that way we're not dependent on mirrors. We're not looking at our image, which can also often be caught up in vanity type things. So she trained me to, feel, are your robes correct? Use your fingers to determine that, not your eyes. And the famous, I don't know if he's a neuroscientist. Now his name is escaping me. He's featured in a movie called Awakenings that stars Robin Williams. Oliver Sacks, thank you. Yes, Oliver Sacks. And my teacher really loved reading his writing, Oliver Sacks, and she pointed out to me one of his writings where he talks about a blind man who he got up on the roof and fixed his gutters. And he did it when it was pitch black out in the middle of the night because it didn't make any difference to him. And so he goes on to say that sight itself is too easy, it's too facile, the facility of sight. And really, if you think about it, our eyes just love to take in forms. Right? It's very easy to take in forms. It's more difficult to use the sense of hearing. I love sight just as much as anybody else does. So I'm not saying we should get rid of our eyes. I'm just saying that we have this, I don't know if it's a bias is the correct word, but we have a love of being able to see that we're often not conscious of. Right? And we often take for granted. We wake up in the morning, our eyes open, we see, and we start to move around, and our day proceeds through sight. But what if we had that sight removed? It's a very special thing to work with those that are without sight. And one of my Zen colleagues is a blind nun. I don't know if she'd consider herself a nun anymore, but she used to, when I was at Mount Equity Zendo, she would come on occasion, maybe once every few years, and offer talks and talk about her experience. And she would often share really deep things about sight, and just being in her presence made me more aware of my own ability to see, and just how much I take it for granted. And then I started I started imagining it just without even much effort. I started imagining when she was in my presence how it would be for her to move around in the kitchen and cook because she was able to do it. She was able to cook, she was able to clean, she was able to walk here and there. No, but without sight. So we have all these other senses going for us, but they don't get as much play when we have these beautiful things called eyes. My teacher one time, I remember we were coming back from something and it was late at night and I was trying to get the door unlocked for my teacher and there was no light in the hallway. For some reason the light had gone out. So I said, I can't see. And she said, feel, feel. So she wanted me to get the right key that will go in that door and do it by feel. That was my training. And it was a tremendous gift. And traditionally, I don't know how it is these days, but it probably depends on the monastery you go to. But in Japan, oftentimes the monasteries are without a great deal of light. And certainly, and they're trying to make at least the place that I trained at Shogoji, they were trying to give the impression of what it was like to train before electricity. And not that these places didn't have electricity, not that they were trying to save money. It's just that when we are so dependent on light, there is something that gets lost, right? There's something, again, there's something beautiful and wonderful about light that comes from electricity. But we have to remember that with whatever technology that we gain, there is something lost as well. And so it's worth investigating that as Zen practitioners. You might try going into a dark bathroom and feeling around and seeing if you can figure things out. It'll open up all of your senses. You'll be much more mindful because you have to be, right? And that's where mindfulness really shouldn't have to be so difficult to do. If you put yourself gently into a dark room, your mindfulness will increase without effort. if you can be without too much fear in the dark, right? I think that's the thing that we often have to overcome is our fear of the dark. But also on an emotional level, Zen is about learning to embrace grief and loss. Sawaki Kodo Roshi said, loss is gain, gain is loss. And so on an emotional level too, we experience grief, we experience loss. And sometimes our spirituality, our spiritual traditions try to leap us out of those losses, that grief that we might be experiencing. And I'm not saying we should stay stuck in a grieving mentality, not at all. And I think that if we're having a hard time with negativity, negative emotions, and the key is transformation. The key is transformation of that negativity. And if we don't embrace it, right? If we don't hold it, if we don't allow it, if we don't feel it, how are you going to embrace it? How are you going to transform it? That's the symbol of Buddhism, is the lotus. The lotus comes out of the muddy water, it takes the mud and it changes it into its flowers. And this is not easy to do. This is not easy to do. We can talk about it, but then there's the doing of it. And that requires the hard work of practice, of sitting, of meditation, in part, as means to transform our suffering. And so Buddhism says, absolutely, you can change it, but you have to recognize it. First noble truth, suffering. Suffering is. So let's just recognize it in our life where it is. Number two, there's a cause. Number three, it can be transformed. It can be changed, right? And so we're doing a lot of different things to do that. And I've in a at the year-end newsletter, I mentioned the 8 points for optimizing our zazen. Those are all things that we can do to transform our suffering. You know, and I think also therapists. Sometimes we need to see a therapist. Sometimes we need medicine. These are all things that can help as well. So we don't want to do this all by ourselves. We don't want to rely totally on zazen to transform our suffering. We can also rely on others. The key is that we don't attempt to try to transform everything all by ourselves. Now, the commentary on this phrase, I'd like to share what I translated with a lot of help from my teacher, because I think it's quite deep, and it highlights also the natural world as an important piece of our practice. In fact, there are Zen ancestors that spoke passionately about our relation, our connection with other species, and that in doing so, in understanding that we actually practice with other species, we mature our understanding. That's a evidence. When we see that we're practicing with other species, that's evidence of our maturing practice. But here's a bit on light and dark and how they play in the natural world, and to help orient us towards that larger context of the natural world in which we're practicing. So here it is. Light and dark is like the sun and the moon. On our planetary home is manifest the quickly spinning dynamic in one day and night. Isn't that beautiful image? The quickly spinning dynamic. Right? The earth is spinning. We're spinning on this planet, and it revolves us between darkness and light every 24 hours. Every day it's as if an arrow were released, turning round and round and going across the universe. Which is most important? This year, one day, the future? At the same time, the sun appears to be moving quickly. It also shines nonchalantly. In the same way, the moon, not standing, not confused, gives and shows its fullness and newness beautifully. In this manner, let's ride the heavenly body's rhythm like riding a wave. Let me read that again. In this manner, let's ride the heavenly body's rhythm like riding a wave. Wow. We're part of that wave, right? How do we ride the heavenly body's rhythm? We have to become perceptive and aware of it. And that, I feel, is Zazen through and through. When we really sit and we become more sensitive to our experience, we can feel, right? We can, I don't know, we get a sense of the movement of things. My teacher would say, the only way for us to see how much the world moves is for us not to. Right? So in our stillness, there is movement. That's also from what we chant here at Nebraska Zen Center, Verses on the Faith in Mind, which is also an ancient Zen poem. Right? In stillness, there is movement. In movement, there is stillness. Continuing here, be careful when you're on your own not to spend time idly. Be careful when you're on your own not to spend time idly. Right? What do we do when we're alone? That's a question we can ask ourselves. How do we use our alone time? Day after day, look up at the sky when you can. Please feel, or the word could be intuit, or sense and see the rhythm of the heavenly bodies. That's what we're after. Feeling, intuiting, sensing the rhythm of the heavenly bodies. And here's a practice that you could try. Every 30 minutes, I have my phone set for a bell to ring. It's the Mindfulness Bell app from Plum Village, and I have it set every 30 minutes. A bell will ring wherever I am. And I use that bell. Sometimes I use it, Thich Nhat Hanh offered the practice of pausing. And actually in Plum Village, they pause every 15 minutes. They sound a bell every 15 minutes. And everybody pauses and breathes for 3 breaths or about, maybe 30 seconds or so. And it's a very challenging practice, especially when we're so busy doing so many different things, to stop what we're doing. And sometimes I have to say I'm not always good at it. But anyways, more recently, and especially since studying this this translation that I'm sharing here, I started thinking, I could use that mindfulness bell every 30 minutes to pause and just look up at the sky and intuit the rhythm of the heavenly bodies. You don't even have to look up at the sky. You don't even have to be outside. If you're not outside, don't go outside to do it. If you're outside, great, then you can do that. But if you're inside, then just get a sense of being on this, being a part of this planet that's turning, right? Can you intuit the rhythm, the movement of the planet? And then the last line here is, decide what you want to do. All right, he's giving us a decision. Decide what you want to do. This is your decision. This is your choice. This is your practice. Is not for me. It's not for the Sangha. It's for you. It's your choice. It's your choice to be here. Decide what you want to do. If you say, I'm too busy, you won't see it. All right, there. That's the point, is that if we, with our constant busyness, and it's a challenge. Let me tell you, from my own reflection on this, it's very, very challenging for me to say, I'm too busy, I can't do this. But I'm working, I'll tell you, I'm a work in progress. Decision is what practice is. We decide to come to practice. All right, I'm going to offer this closing phrase for you, and then if you like comments or questions. An arrow flies across the universe. It hits the arrow of the universe. Where does it land? Meeting every moment. Thank you.
Thank you, Daishin.
Daishin, this is Pam.
Hey, Pam.
I remember I was in a Dharma study a few years back. We were looking at the Sandokai, the harmony of difference and sameness. And that's the first time that somebody brought this to my attention, that in so many Zen writings, a reference to darkness really refers to the enlightened state, and the reference to light refers to our everyday routine view of things. And I just remember it was a real revelation to me.
Yeah, I think you're not alone there.
Yeah.
There's some part of us that knows this deeply, and to have it affirmed from a spiritual tradition, I think is really important for us. It's healthy for us. Yeah.
Yeah, I've got a quick question. this is kind of a curious thing to me. I feel like I know my understanding or perception of the reason why, but you know, in this tradition we meditate with our eyes open, where others meditate with their eyes closed. I used to practice other traditions with eyes closed. I find a very different experience between both of those. They may look physically similar, but I was just curious what your thoughts are on that, and maybe help kind of give a little more information on that, if you wouldn't mind.
Absolutely, yeah. I think a lot of people are curious about that question too. Like, why in Zen, Zazen, why do we do it with our eyes open? And there's several things I can say. Well, one is when my teacher taught Zazen, she would emphasize the eyes being open, and the reasons she gave were that the eyes open means that we're in this world. We don't go somewhere. And at least I don't know how it is today as much, but at least in the early, when these kinds of Asian practices were being introduced to Westerners, there's a perception of like journeying or traveling or something like that in the mind, or spiritual journey or something like that, where you're going to a place. And so she wanted to emphasize we're not going anywhere. And so we keep the eyes open, we're staying right here in the present moment. So that was one thing that she mentioned. The other thing that can be really powerful about having the eyes open is we have to keep in mind that there's a soft focus with the eyes. So we're not trying to pinpoint, we're not trying to focus our eyes on an object when we're sitting in Zazen. And when we unfocus, when we have our eyes in the peripheral vision, we're more aware of our peripheral vision, it really relaxes the brain in a way. I don't know if there is empirical evidence to support this, but I can feel my brain is working and functioning differently when I'm not hyper focused on one object, right? When my attention, my vision is spread out. And that is in sync with the philosophy underlying Zazen, is we're not trying to fix our attention on our mind on one point, but to keep it open. So the same with the eyes, but the eyes kept open, but diffuse attention. And you can't do that, I don't think. Well, you know what, I don't know. I can't speak authoritatively on meditating with your eyes closed. So I don't want to say that that's a wrong practice. It's just not something that I've experienced with any depth. And I also don't want to discourage or say that open eyes is better than closed. I'm just offering reasons why we do it in our tradition. And honestly, my teachers have been pretty strict with keeping the eyes open. But if you ask me, I would say experiment. You know, the Zen tradition talks about eyes open, but you know, it's your practice, and you need to explore these things for yourself and see, oh, well, maybe I sit Zazen one period with my eyes closed, right? See if it's different. See if you notice versus eyes open. So instead of giving you you have to do it this way, I would say experiment with it and see for yourself what the differences are, and then make a decision. I mean, you're always welcome. Just because you sit with your eyes closed doesn't mean you can't come to a Zen center. And so, you know, you got to find what works. And if I'm super tired or sleepy, like during sesshin, eyes that just get super heavy. Those eyelids are so heavy sometimes for some of those sittings. It's just like, I don't know, I can't do anything. So there is a place for it too. The other thing to think about is that there is an association with alertness with the eyes open, and I think that's also connected with being in the present moment. not going anywhere, being aware of what's in your immediate surroundings. That's valued in Zen practice. Yeah, so you do have to be careful. If the eyes are closed, make sure your other senses are operating and you're here and now, right? You're not drifting into dreamland. That's really the kind of admonition, one of the admonitions with Zen training and having the eyes open. We don't want you to drift off into dreaming while we're sitting.
Yeah, that was one of the issues I had. As I wasn't sure if I was awake or asleep, when I was sitting with my eyes closed. You kind of have these fantastical, visions and spiritual experiences, and then, it's sort of it seems like a distraction now. But I was just curious. It seemed like sort of an inverse relationship with light and dark too. But I think it's just interesting too, just to notice too how our identity attaches to sight or other senses too. There's a weird thing there. I don't know. It just was curious to me.
It's worth being curious about. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for bringing that up.
I'm just kind of like entertaining a thought right now. And it was like you're talking about like going into the bathroom in the dark and doing stuff or putting on your robes in the dark. Is there like kind of some parallel to be drawn between like maybe there's some benefit from doing zazen in the dark, or is it that emphasis on the open eye?
Right. Well, I think getting back to what was just mentioned is that we attach our identity to certain activities, and so part of Zen training is to let go of some of those fixed identities that we have about who we are and what we do. And one of the ways to train to dislodge that identity is to do things in the dark where it's appropriate and safe, right? I don't want to recommend doing things that are inappropriate or unsafe, but where it's appropriate and safe, experimenting with that, how our identity, our self, is tied up with light and dark.
Yeah, Daishin, in other traditions, sunlight is metaphor for the rational mind, a mind that sees with the intellect, that sees things as light and dark, left and right, up and down, good and bad. That's the sunlight. That's the metaphor. It's the piercing intellect. Moonlight is seen as being reflective, intuitive. Very much like Zazen, sitting deeply and allowing us and the world to reflect each other, much like the light coming off the moon. So having the idea of being in the dark with the only light you have is moonlight, reflective light, gives you a different sense of a practice. And of course, Dogen Zenji talks about moonlight and the dewdrop and so forth.
Yeah.
It's a good metaphor.
Yeah, the lighting sets the mood, certainly. And when we allow ourselves to experience the natural light, it really sets the mood for our meditation. So again, that's another thing to keep in mind.
Anyone else? Anyone online? Close?
Oh yeah, you want to do an informal close with?
Sure.
Oh yeah, we'll do the 4 vows. I think it's bottom page 2.
Yeah, I just want to, before we end here, just to thank everybody for their practice, everybody at NZC, all those I see online as well. And just to mention real quickly, I'm sure you guys are going to mention this afterwards too, but we have our annual meeting today. So we're going to be talking about that at board meeting just after.
Thank you, Daishin. I forgot the announcements.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I invite everybody, if you could stay for the annual meeting and
to them. Buddha's way is unsurpassable. I vow to realize it.
Thank you, Daishin. Now everybody can put their shoes back, brush them off, put them in place, and we'll bow out.
Okay, everybody. Good to see everybody online. John and Navab and Jason, Rick, Joe, Carolee, and Mark. You guys take good care.
Daishin, we'll be back